could be on the move who were playing last night. He is Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac. What's up, Mike? How are you?
Doing well. Big weekend here. Just kind of coming down from the big high.
Absolutely, Mike. And it is crazy. I know you cover a lot of different sports, and your website manages a lot of different salary cap numbers, and you've got different things going on around the sports world. Only in the NFL, right, are we so quickly shifting to free agency contract numbers, who is available and who is not?
Yeah, you got it. Midnight last night, I turned the key over, and it's all about the nerdiness and the numbers from this point on. So it's a 12-month season. There's no question about it.
Love it. Mike, let's start with Kansas City. How easily can the Chiefs keep the band together? What are some of the difficult decisions they're going to have to make this offseason, starting with what in the world do you do again with Chris Jones?
Yeah, it's not an easy offseason for them. I dove pretty heavily this morning into that specifically, right? I mean, does Travis Kelce return, right? That's probably X factor number one, because you've already got to replace 3 or 4 weapons from a running back wide receiver standpoint. And then if he walks away, it's a really big situation. So L'Jarius Sneed, Chris Jones, a couple of linebackers, etc. You're talking hundreds of dollars of guaranteed money that has to get thrown out just to retain those players, or you just kind of make this a revolving door situation, and every offseason you're just going to lose 6 or 7 notable players and have to hope that Mahomes and Andy Reid can right the ship at the end of the season. So not easy. One of the harder off seasons for a winner, I'd say, that over the past couple of years, 49ers a much easier path to run it back with that roster that we saw yesterday.
Mike Ginnitti, Spotrac, our guest this morning on Ramon, Kayla and Will. And Mike, you wrote about on Spotrac yesterday about 10 players looking for a payday in the Super Bowl and ways that maybe they look elsewhere to do that. Brandon Aiyuk was an interesting one in that, because he's headed towards a $14.1 million fully guaranteed 50-year option, but may be a trade candidate considering the other options that San Francisco has. With the Rand Carthon connection here, Mike, Tennessee fans are very interested in 49ers that could potentially come over here. What would he look like as a potential trade candidate? How would that work, in your opinion?
I think it's an excellent fit, and I think without a doubt that Brandon Aiyuk's name is going to be in trade rumors over the next couple of weeks as we approach that March 13th date. So, what does it take? The problem is he's been kind of pigeonholed, right? He's the 5th option on an unbelievably explosive 49ers offense. So, you're bringing a player in who's going to outkick his coverage quickly. He's going to become a number 1, number 2 option wherever he ends up, and that's going to cost upwards of $22, $25 million a year. It's just the going rate for that 2nd tier, 3rd tier wide receiver that has a higher ceiling. So from a draft pick compensation standpoint, you're in that 2nd to 3rd round range, but knowing what kind of contract is coming behind that after the 5th year option season, it's not an easy undertaking for an organization, but don't get there's at least a half a dozen teams thinking about this exact scenario right now.
Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac with us this morning. Mike, thanks for joining us, man. Spicy offseason, I think, here for the Titans, too. And that's where I want to start. I think last night showed us that defense does win championships, and also Patrick Mahomes, too. But the defensive side of things, man, is there a world where here in Nashville with them having a rookie quarterback still that you can go get a D-tackle, D-end type like Leonard Williams or Chris Jones or DJ Reader and make that work here for this Titans defense?
Look, for a long time, this position had been devalued, right? You were seeing $5 million veteran contracts. You were seeing teams go into the 4th round and try to put starting lineups out there with mid-tier defensive tackles and just trying to bolster it. You're seeing the swing. You're seeing the swing happen where, the quarterbacks have such quick releases that this interior defensive lineman has become maybe as highly valued, as highly sought after as the edge defender. And you're just going to have to pay a premium, unfortunately, right? We saw what happened with Montez Sweat last year, who could play inside, outside. If you got that hybrid type of player in you, you're a $25 million player right now. So, yes, Tennessee can do it, if they're going to focus defensively first and then maybe patchwork the offense next offseason. But it's going to cost big, big money. Chris Jones is still a $30 million player. The Reader situation with the injury may be a little bit less impactful, but you're talking within reason, $20 to $30 million for any high-stake defensive tackle that can move inside outside.
And that, let's go to the other side of the ball with that too. For a high value or even above the line starter as far as guards and center, there's a few guys coming out: Andrews Peak, Kevin Zeitler, Connor Williams, just to name. And even here, Aaron Brewer is another one of those free agent guys. What is the going rate for those interior protection guys on the offensive side of the ball?
Skyrocketing, absolutely skyrocketing, right? I mean, what we just saw Kevin Dotson do, moving from Pittsburgh to the Rams, probably made him $50 million guaranteed. No joke. He might be a $16 million per year player, doing what he did and knowing what the Rams do in terms of their offensive line. Brewer's not yet in that case. He's about an $8-9 million per year player in my system, so maybe 3 for 24, 25-ish, which is good value if he can play, if he's a 17-week starter. So. But there's no question that the center market, Creed Humphrey should destroy that center market next offseason if they don't sign him this year. It's an absolute avalanche of money that used to just go to that left tackle, and now we're seeing all 5 positions really thrive financially on that offensive line.
Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac joining us this morning on RK-Dub. So, Mike, another position that the Titans really need to upgrade on, and it's just been 2 years with not a lot of production back there in the secondary, is the cornerback position. Look, they don't have a third-round pick right now in the draft. There are all these other needs. If you decided to go into free agency in this direction, obviously L'Jarius Sneed is the number 1 cornerback on the market right now. What are we looking like in terms of price to get a guy like that?
Nobody made more money this year than L'Jarius Sneed in our system. He was an $11 million kind of fringe CB2 coming into the season because Trent McDuffie existed on that roster. He's an absolute superstar. He's an $18 million per year player easily. If somebody wants to overpay on like a J.C. Jackson type free agent contract, that wouldn't surprise me one iota. So Jalen Johnson, L'Jarius Sneed up there, top of the market. But there's talent, right? I mean, the Commanders have decisions to make on players like Kendall Curl and Kendall Fuller. The Stephon Gilmore situation in Dallas might be fluid. That's a veteran player who's still producing. So I do think it's a pretty good offseason in terms of both the draft and in the free agency for this position. But if you're going for one of the big fish, it's 18 to 20 million a year, and it's going to be painful. It's just where we are right now with that market.
Well, it's been interesting here with what people think about, where Derrick Henry will go next. And there's a lot of, fans that want him back, rightfully so. They'd love to see him retire in two-tone blue. But in reality, I think you probably see him go somewhere else. But what's the market out there for him, Mike?
This has been one of the more polarizing situations we've had this winter because, look, the stats still say $10 million a year. The stats still say he should sign a 2 for 20. He's still one of the highest rated. Even the advanced stuff still says he can do this at a high level. He's just not a dynasty running back anymore, right? He's a 1 or 2 year flyer, and you know what you're getting, I think. I still think that we get there, and it's important, by the way, for this running back market and this position financially, that he maximizes his compensation, even if it's with, right, Philly or Baltimore or one of these contending teams that may not have the cap room necessarily speaking. So I'm not going to sit here and say he's a minimum player, even though most of these veteran running backs at his age go down to the 1 or 2 million mark. But I'm just telling you what the math tells me. It's about $10 million a year. I don't know if we end up there, but for the running back's sake, I sure hope it does.
Mike Ginnitti, Spotrac, our guest. Mike, T. Higgins, as an East Tennessee native and as a Brian Callahan wide receiver, is a guy who people would love to be playing in two-tone blue here in Nashville this next fall. What are the likelihood that he gets franchise tagged? And if not, what does his market look like?
Yeah, that's a great one. Cincinnati doesn't have a lot of operating room to work with, so that $20 million tag, $22 million tag may be a little bit rich for that. If we talk about a tag and trade, possibly I could get into that conversation. If he hits, though, look, there's been injuries, there's been setbacks. The math isn't in his favor right now. He's still about that $20 to $21 million player in our system. So the tag is probably fair value for what he's worth on the open market. But, you're adding 3 years fully guaranteed on an extension with that kind of player. So I don't think he hits the market, but if so, probably around $20 million a year is about right.
Mike, it's a little bit of a homer question here in Middle Tennessee, but it's a relevant one. How much money did Jawan Jennings maybe make himself last night with, I mean, listen, I know he's from Murfreesboro and he's a Tennessee Vol and this is a Tennessee station, but we were not that far off from like a plus 3,000 Jawan Jennings Super Bowl MVP ticket from hitting last night.
I definitely looked it up when he threw and then caught that touchdown. He's a restricted free agent, believe it or not. So he's going to make a tender of about $2.5 million if they bring him back, and I believe they will with that versatility. So not a ton of money this year, but if he sticks, but if they move on from Aiyuk and he becomes a bigger role in that offense, he's certainly on his way to a much bigger platform.
One conversation that has to be had also is the idea of age and free agency now. We saw DeAndre Hopkins be 30-plus and get 1,000 yards this year, and other players have done the exact same thing too. Have you had to change the way you view guys? And you mentioned Derrick also, and how they hit free agency and how they maximize steal their monies in this market that they have now. Odell Beckham's another 30-plus-year-old that's going to be middle-of-the-road top free agent this offseason.
I just think offenses have figured out how to use players, right, that have experience, and if you want to call that age, call it age, right? I mean, Raheem Mostert broke the he broke the mold in terms of usage at that age, and I don't think that's going away. So we're just getting smarter. The offense is more spread out for players like that, so to protect them from injury and things like that. We have it's funny. This is a great question, by the way. We have now a trigger when we evaluate contracts. It allows me to say, am I including age in this or not? And a lot of times I'll say no. For Derrick Henry, I say no. I don't want to know what age he is. I just want to know what he does in the field because it hasn't changed in a decade. So, yes, we do factor in that this is a changing evolution of process, and I think offenses are just getting smarter, which should help veterans in this league longer.
The other side of that, too, is when it comes down to position value. Middle linebackers, the fact that Devin White, I think, is about to be a free agent unless they franchise tag him or something. But as far as linebacker and safety, how do you view those two positions in today's football? Because I think you see the importance of having real solid ones, but a lot of teams have guys that you can't necessarily name up the middle.
That's good. It's fair, right? I mean, you got your superstars for sure. The off-ball linebacker market's at $20 million. That's where the safety market is as well. But you know, I'm Buffalo-based here. We saw Jordan Poyer try to go out there on the open market last year and come back on basically a one-year, $6 million contract. So you're right. The shine wears off quickly on those kind of players in terms of what they can bank on the open market. Now, that's not to say that Antoine Winfield Jr. and those type of superstar young players aren't going to go out there and make a name for themselves. But there's no question that you're seeing more teams, if they're paying one off-ball linebacker, they're certainly not going to pay two. They're going back into that second or third round to pick the next middle of their defense for the next couple of years. So it's a fluctuating market, I would say, and every so often you find a couple of diamonds in the rough.
Mike Ginnitti of Spotrac joining us this morning on RK Dub. Okay, so offensive line too, one of the positions where, they're trying just to build something here, and it's pretty much from scratch. Is there anything, or how difficult should I say, is it to find linemen in free agency, especially those tackles? They're so far and few between. Yeah,
that's fair. Look, the contending teams are doing it. They're still finding a way to bring in team-friendly contracts, right? You saw Donovan Smith become the left tackle for the Chiefs after spending a long tenure in Tampa Bay. So those kind of players are still bouncing around a little bit here. But for the most part, and I hope it does ramp up, I do think teams are going to have to get more creative via the trade with that offensive line, unless it's simply just we're just going to run these guys into the ground and go back to the draft. But I just don't think you can do that when you have a franchise quarterback who wants consistency. So, good players like that don't hit the open market. That's why free agency exists. And if you're going to be overpaying for not so great players to do that. So my guess would be teams like Tennessee will be identifying draft picks for sure. But don't hold out on swinging on a couple of nice trades with teams like maybe Minnesota and Seattle that could be trending downward and need to remove some parts before they go all the way down.
Mike, for a Titans team that has so much cap space this upcoming offseason, how much of a premium do you have to pay because of the space you have? And Ramon has talked to us about this a lot, that guys know how much money you have to spend, right? If they know you've got $70+ million of cap space like you guys estimate at Spotrac, then the Titans might have to pay a little bit more than some of those other teams contending with them.
Yeah, it's a nice point, right? The Patriots throughout that entire dynasty basically ran themselves razor thin for that exact reason. They wanted to be able to pinch pennies with their extension candidates and internal processes, so they didn't want to show their hand, essentially. You can always open up cap space, but yeah, when you're walking into March with $70 million plus, everybody knows your business, and they know exactly how this is going to operate. To me, it's more about, can you attract the players, right? And if the finances is what will attract them, then certainly overpaying is the way to do it. But if you can put together a couple of contracts early, on March 13th, March 14th, that'll send a message to a lot of agents that you're open for business and you're willing to front load things with that cap space. That's a very attractive. Cash in hand is always a way to attract a player to your town if you need to do it that way. So it's not so much what the cap says, it's are you willing to use that cap space, and are you willing to use it with cash in mind as well?
Some people don't believe that the salary cap is real, but what can Buffalo say about it, considering the situations that they're in right now? Can they keep that together? I know Von Miller may have an expiring contract, but how do they keep Buffalo together and hopefully see Josh Allen in the Super Bowl one day?
Yeah, in a normal setting, I'd say they're fine, right, even though the minus 50 or so looks scary heading towards March. But you mentioned Von Miller. The Von Miller and the Stephon Diggs situations just appear to be kind of stuck right now, and I mean that from a contractual standpoint. There really is no getting out of those contracts, even if you're talking about a trade for Stephon Diggs, which has been all the buzz around here. So it's less about can they get cap compliant and more about do they actually have players and contracts on their books right now that they want here. So that's what concerns me most about the Buffalo Bills going forward. And I'd put the Dolphins in a very similar situation. Similar cap space, minus 50-something, and what do we do with Tua Tagovailoa? What do we do with Jalen Waddle? Because both need $100 million guaranteed over the next couple of off seasons here, and decisions have to be made.
Mike, going back real quick to the Chiefs, you said they might want to address the fact of Andy Reid's contract before they even start talking about free agents and extension. I didn't realize this, but he earns about $12 million, you say, per year. That's $5 million or so less than the top coaching deals in football right now?
Yeah, some of these young guns and Jim Harbaugh just secured $16.5, $17 million contracts. So it's a sliding scale, and he's been compensated well. I think he signed about 3 years ago now. I believe there's 2 years left on his contract. But, you know, it's always a good time to sit down and talk about a new one. He probably wants to finish his career off with this next contract, and he's going to have to go to the top of the market. There's just no getting around that.
He is Mike Ginnitti, a Spotrac NFL contract expert overall. You need to check out that website, spotrac.com. It is the place to go as you build your own Titans offseason and free agent targets and things of that nature. Mike, great insight as always. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. There he is, Mike Ginnitti. Saying T. Higgins maybe does not have as many options as people would think. Interesting. The Derrick Henry part of that conversation intrigues me. And I want to get into that coming up next. Why Mike Ginnitti thinks Derrick Henry might still get a payday this offseason. Coming up next.